Our next speaker, I'm incredibly honored and humbled to announce Sharon Venne is with us here this afternoon. She's a member of the Cree Nation, an accomplished First Nations lawyer. She's worked on the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People since the 1970s at the United Nations in Geneva and New York. She's a lobbyist and an expert on Indigenous politics at the UN and has won several cases against Canada. She also works with First Nations communities on implementing their own legal systems and advocates for First Nations to be recognized as peoples and not just people, a word that is used to refer to a minority and not what First Nations in Canada are working towards, nations. She served as an advisor for the Leonard Peltier Defense Committee's international team, played an active role in the national and international struggle of many Indigenous peoples, including the Lubicon Cree and the Dene Nation. Sharon has a Master's of Law degree from the University of Alberta and is the author of Our Elders Understand Our Rights, Evolving International Law Regarding Indigenous Peoples, from Titus Books, published in 1998. It is my honor to present to you one of our deepest thinkers in the world, Miss Sharon Venne. And you can move around if you feel to.
Short crease. Ai. Nia no te kwa masko mantokan. Dodam peso masko. To all my relatives, I notice I have a lot of relatives here today. I keep running into you in the hallways. And I'm very honored to be invited to speak here. I was asked to talk about Indigenous views of education. And I thought I should talk about something that's not quite often talked about, is how lifelong learning, what does that really mean? Before a woman gets pregnant with a baby, she's supposed to do a ceremony to ask for that child to come from the spirit world so that she would be gifted with a child. And this gift that is coming to her, it comes with all the knowledge intact. But what's happened with the colonization process is that our people have forgotten to do that. They forgot to put out the tobacco, and they forgot to put out the offerings to the creation for the gift of that child. And so when you do that, this child comes to you in a kind of a funny way. You haven't really asked for it, but it's coming anyway. I met a lady not too long ago, and she was telling me that she had tried to write a thesis for a university, doing a doctorate in lifelong learning. And the first 78 pages of her thesis was a recounting of her remembrance of sitting next to the creation and having a discussion with the Creator about coming to Turtle Island and being asked which family did she want to go to. And she picked a family because the ceremonies that they were doing. And she wrote this about in her thesis. And the university rejected those first 78 pages as quote-unquote fantasy and not realistic. She was very devastated by that. Because even though universities think or say that they really want Indigenous peoples to bring their knowledge into the institutions, they don't really want it. What they want you to do is to conform to the colonizers' view of education. And so when you step out of line in what they want you to do, you either are marginalized or they try to shame you into agreeing to their projects. And I've witnessed this many times. I myself used to be a professor at the university here, at the law school. And I resigned from that professorship because of the extreme racism that was directed at me by the faculty, the staff, and the students. One student told me that she paid good money to go to law school to have a professor like me. And I said to her, "You're lucky to have a professor like me, because I have more degrees than any of these other people in this institution. So you're lucky." She didn't see it that way. But the university never defended me, because although they wanted an Indian in the faculty, they didn't really want an Indian. They just wanted an Indian that looked like an Indian, standing there saying, "I'm an Indian," so that they can check off some box. I'm also blind on one eye, so they could check off the disability. I'm a woman, they could check off the woman. And I was an older professor, so they could check off aged criteria, so I could check all the boxes. But they didn't really want me there, because they didn't really want me to talk about Indigenous law. What they wanted me to talk about is the colonizers' law as it affects our peoples. And I see the same thing in education. One time I developed a curriculum to teach treaty to our people, because our people don't understand the treaty relationship, because they don't understand why they're on Turtle Island, how they got to be on Turtle Island, what clans did they come from. Do you know you're not supposed to marry within your clan? They have all this kind of weird stuff now. I fell in love and I had to get married and all that sort of rubbish. You know? That's the colonizers' thinking. Just think about how you think about that. That you would violate your laws of your own people in order to do that. That's a real violation of the laws. So we don't think as Indigenous peoples very often, only when it suits us. Only when it might get you something. Then you'll say, "Oh, by the way, I'm Indigenous," rather than living it every day. And that's what education, so-called education, because every one of you, I bet when you think education, you think of the non-Indigenous world. I'm going to get an education. When every day that you live as an Indigenous person is an education. And so you need to rethink that. And I often say to young people, and I work a lot with young people, they say to me, "Oh, I left school. I was only like 14 or 15. I left school," and I say, "Why?" "Because I didn't see anything there for me." And I'll say, "Yes, you're right. You are the closest to the Creator. You came from the Creator. And your memory of that life at the time of the creation is still with you. You're a very strong-minded person. You should be treasured. But what we're doing is we're throwing away those people." And I find that very, very hard to take, because that is our future. If we continue to follow along the lines of these colonizers in our territory and the way they think, where are we going to be in 100 years? We are living in the 7th generation from the time the treaty was made. The Peace and Friendship Treaty. You listen to all these people coming into our country now, and they say, "Oh, we come here to this place called Canada because it's peaceful." Why is it peaceful? Because the Indigenous people said we would live in peace. That's our gift to them. And yet, do they acknowledge us? No. They think somehow Canada gave them this right, when it's us that gave that right to them. So you need to rethink everything you think you know about this whole process. Like, how many people here think we made treaty with Canada? Don't, if you're afraid to put up your hand, probably a good idea, because I might schmuck you one. We made treaty with the Crown. I always tell the chiefs, I tell people, do never ever say that we made treaty with Canada, because we did not. The Great White Mother came across the waters and she said she wanted to make a peace and friendship treaty with our people. And we did. It's very important to remember that was a peace and friendship treaty. We never gave up our land. There was no land surrender. Why do we know that? because our women never touched the treaty. And you would say, listen to the non-Indigenous world, and they'd say, well, the women didn't touch the treaty because they didn't have the capacity. They're talking about themselves. They're not talking about us. We had the capacity and we chose not to touch the treaty because we were the landowners. Because the women give birth as the land gives birth. We are intimately connected to the land, and the land is connected to us. So when the old people said we never gave up anything, they knew that because the women never touched the treaty. And I was asked by an elder from Frog Lake one time, she's passed away now, but she said to me, I want you to write this down. I want you to put this in a paper. Because there's a lot of our young women don't remember what their relationship with the land is anymore. They think like Muniausko, white women. They don't remember their roles and responsibilities anymore. And you need to put that in a piece of paper. So I wrote it down, and I took it over and I read it to her. And I said, is this the way you wanted it? And she said, yeah, it's okay. Miawasin. She said, go ahead. But how many of our people actually go back to check with our old people? Is this the right way to put something down? I hear lots of times people tell me things, that their young people are saying things, or writing things, or they're talking about things, but they don't even know what they're talking about. They think that's what they should say, like they were watching John Wayne on TV or something. And they think that's the right way to think. But they don't go back to the time of the creation. Why did they come here to Turtle Island? What are you doing here on Turtle Island? What are you going to report back when you go back to the creation? What's your report going to say? Because you're going to have to report back. You think you're going to get away and say, no, I don't have to report? Wrong. You get a 0 for that one. Because you do have to. You were sent here from the creation with instructions. And those instructions are what they call the original instructions of the creation. Every one of us who say that we're from Turtle Island, that we're indigenous to Turtle Island, you all have that responsibility. So what are you passing on to the children in your care in these institutions called schools? What are you doing? Technically, I don't like to get technical with you, but technically, we're only supposed to have a child every 7 years. Because you're supposed to raise the child through the first 7 years to teach them everything that they need to do and learn so that they can go into their first society. How many people follow that? How many people even know that? And so when you get a student in school and they're acting out, how do you treat that child? That child is trying to probably tell you something. They don't have the knowledge, the language to articulate that and tell you what's going on with them, but something is happening. And for the most part, people dismiss them or they medicate them, which I find a little bit apprehensive. Because every one of us comes from the Creator with information. That's why you watch old people and they sit and they listen to babies talking, and you think, oh, the baby's just, goo-gooing, gaga-ing, whatever they're doing, whatever they think you think they're doing. But they're communicating with that elder. The information that came from the Creator. It's a very powerful message. And as young women, you need to know that. And as young men, you also need to know that you have to support that process, because the women are the creators. They create life. You are the helper. You are to help them. And that should be all the way through school. Like when I was going back just 2 minutes, I can tell you about this thing about teaching the treaty. I was working in a First Nation, and the chief and council said to me, can you go across the road to the school and talk to the grades 7, 8, and 9 about treaty? I said, oh, okay, I don't normally talk to young people about treaties, but okay, I'll try it. So I went across the road and I was trying to think, how can I kind of, talk to them, because I'm normally used to talking to adults. Anyway, so I went across and I thought, well, let's start with something easy. What treaty area are you from? They didn't know. I said, do you know the name of the chief that made treaty for you? No, even though the school is named after the chief, some of them even had jackets that said that. I said, was a chief? So they said, Chief Sitting Bull. And I said, no, wrong nation. The other side of the medicine line, like, how about Crazy Horse? No, wrong, sorry. Geronimo, no. Big Bear, no, sorry. No. They didn't know. I said, okay, let's make it easy. What year was the treaty made? They didn't know that either. I said, where was the treaty made? I said, I'll give you a site. I'll give you a little thing. It was made at a fort. I said, and so they're, Fort Saskatchewan, Fort Chipewyan, Fort Macleod. This is in Alberta, but anyway. They didn't know. And so I went across the road and I talked to the chief and council and I said, you guys spent a lot of time and effort talking about treaties. But that school across that you fought so hard to have a school in your community, your kids don't know nothing about treaty. And I told them exactly what happened in that classroom. And they were really shocked. And so the chief said to me, well, then you should teach the treaty in the school. I said, me? Teach? I'm not a teacher. He said, yeah, you're a teacher, you can teach. Anyway, I developed a curriculum. And I tell you, the hardest problem about developing the curriculum was not the development of the curriculum, but was the teachers in the school. Even our own people were saying, she can't teach in the classroom because she doesn't have a certificate to teach in the classroom. She's not qualified to teach in the classroom because she's never been to Department of Education with a certificate, even though I think at that time already had 3 degrees. Anyway, so they had somebody else supposedly teaching the class, and I would teach with him because he was a registered person teacher. But what I did is I did something to the students because I really wanted them to understand how much Indigenous peoples contributed to so-called civilization. And I had a list of 25 foods, like tomatoes, potatoes, pumpkins, beans, corn, squash, all these different things. Chocolate, popcorn, potato chips, all this sort of stuff. And then I put in there moose, elk, cranberries, blueberries, and bannock. And I asked the students to check off on these foods, which ones did we contribute to the non-Indigenous world. And they checked off moose, cranberries, blueberries, I think I had muskrat on there, and bannock. The rest of them they left off. And I said to them, if this was an exam and I was testing you, everybody failed. Got a big fat 0. I said, you should have checked off everything except bannock. Because all those foods we contributed to the world. 80% of the foods in the world today are foods that came from the Americas, that were grown by Indigenous peoples before the arrival of Columbus. And so what I did is I made the students research those foods that were on that list. They had to write a little 2-paragraph essay. And then I had a feast of all those foods. And we put everything on the floor and I said, look at what's on the floor. Think of that as a day before the treaty. We had everything. And the treaty was on top of what we had. Because I needed them to visually think in their minds, to put it in their minds that we contributed a lot. That we were not passively sitting there waiting for the Great White Mother to show up and save us, which is quite often people say things like that to me. I want to smack them down, but anyway. These students needed to see that. And so in another class, I was skinning rabbits, and one of the students says, excuse me. I said, yes. He said, how do you learn how to skin rabbits? And I went, I don't know. I skinned rabbits since I was, 5, 6 years old. I don't know how old I was when I started skinning rabbits. And they said, but you're a lawyer. How could you know how to skin rabbits? And I said, because before I was a lawyer, I was an Indian. So we can live in both worlds. Actually, I can live in both worlds very well. I actually beat the other people in their world too. Because we just won a big court case. I don't know if you heard about it, C-27. We smacked down Harper. And everybody told us there was no way we were going to win. And I said, yes, we are. You know why? Because we're treaty peoples. And treaty peoples have rights, and we have to use them to defend ourselves. But you have to know what they are. And that's what the education system should be teaching. What are our rights? And they should be started before people go to school. Because if you don't know that, you can't defend yourselves. And somebody just sent me a text this morning saying, otherwise we're just glamorized performers. Please don't be a glamorized performer, Teach our children the real truth of who we are. Because we have responsibilities and obligations if we live on Turtle Island. And for those people that say, oh, well, I don't know who I am, if you can speak and you can say that sentence, then you have an obligation to find out who you are. Don't come crying to me because you're not going to get any sympathy. I'm not going to sympathize with you. You are an adult, you can do it. If you're a baby and you're 3 years old and you tell me you don't know who you are, okay, I can live with that. But you're an adult talking to me, I don't accept it. So that's your responsibility, that's your job. So that's what Indigenous education means to me. Before birth, you are being instructed. And when you pass away and you're going back to the creation, there's 3 questions that are going to be asked to you. 3 questions. And you better answer them or know what the answers are. But first of all, you need to know what the questions are. And if you think I'm going to tell you, I'm not. But there's 3 questions out there. And you have to find out. So, hi.